I'm speaking to Peter Moller, Head of Shared Services and BPO Advisory at Deloitte. Peter participated in the G8 session today at the Shared Services and Outsourcing Week here in Edinburgh. Peter, a lot of interesting discussion today. One particular question centred on location. And does it make sense to locate in countries with cheaper labour arbitrage when the process or price will inevitably go up? And you had quite an interesting thought around that.
Yeah, I think my point was that a lot of people, they read that labour rates in places like India and the Philippines are growing at maybe 15% a year, and they conclude that within a matter of a few years there won't be a labour arbitrage. Well, the maths suggest otherwise. If this is the point I made, let me see if I can get this right. If you have in the UK labour rates that in India are 80% cheaper, i.e. you're basically a fifth of the cost in India as the UK, and if the UK rate is growing at 5% a year and the Indian rate is growing at 15% a year, then that labour arbitrage, which now there's an 80% difference, in 10 years there's still going to be a 50% difference. And this is what people don't understand. You can grow at 15%, but if it's a small starting block you're growing from, it's going to take a long time to catch up. So in 10 years' time, there's still an opportunity to reduce labour costs by 50% by moving to India, and that's probably about accurate. So my view is India will still offer a good business case in 10 years, possibly even 20 years down the line, there will be a significant labour arbitrage.
One of the interesting points from this session for me centred on the number of finance graduates coming out of the US and UK this year alone still won't reach that number in India. Do you not think that this gives the amount of talent, etc., based in India and such locations, gives them the opportunity to raise rates, to become a major players in the field?
It certainly gives them the opportunity to dominate the BPO and sort of offshore shared services market, which India has done. If you look at the global hub market, if you like, then it's India, Philippines, but much, much smaller than India. China really doesn't have the language capability, the English language capability. The accent neutralization there is still a big issue. So looking at the global hub market as opposed to the language capable market. So looking at the language capable market, if you need languages, you've got to go to Eastern Europe. You go to Hungary, you go to Czech, you go to Poland, you go to Romania. If you need European languages, if you need Spanish, you may go to the Americas, Latin America. But if you just need English language, India is the dominant place. Having 2.5 million English language speaking graduates a year coming onto the market gives them a huge talent pool. And it's not just the low labour costs that you find out there, it's also the fact that the education system is geared up to training people to be able to be good at this type of work. So they are very good. And the finance graduates, my view is that if there are a lot of them in India, it's actually going to keep the price down because supply will easily be able to accommodate demand.
Of course, there was always the usual argument of automation versus outsourcing. And the question following the recession, etc., will outsourcing still continue at the rate that it has done? Or will we see a rise in automation? I think Tom Bangaman pointed out that there's only 20 to 40% of organisations actually using automation to their full capability. What's your thoughts on that? My
thoughts are that it's not an either or question. You need to automate, you need to get labour arbitrage. Outsourcing is, I differentiate between offshoring to get labour arbitrage, or nearshoring perhaps, and outsourcing, which is a change of ownership. But if you look at the labour arbitrage versus automation argument, they are two levers of what I call the 8 sort of back office transformation levers or support service transformation levers. Those 8 levers are eliminate, simplify, automate, standardise, consolidate, offshore to get labour arbitrage, outsource where it makes sense, and set up a continuous improvement capability within your organisation. Now those 8 things, you have to do all of them. You can't say, well, I'm just going to automate and do a bit of consolidation. You need to do the whole lot. The question for me that's interesting is, what's the order? Do you automate and standardise first and then offshore? Or do you try and move stuff offshore to get the labour arbitrage as early as possible and then try and standardise and put in new technology? Do you do it as a captive and then spin it off to a shared service, to an outsourced provider? Or do you outsource it, after you've done the transformation, or outsource it and have the outsourcer do the transformation. So the questions for me is the end game. You need to work out what the end game is, but then more difficult, how the hell you get there from the mess you're in today. That's the interesting question.
I thought a really interesting question came from the audience. You know, what's left in the outsourcing laboratory? What's new? What's the future going to bring?
Yes, and I agree with some members of the panel who said that organisations are probably scratching the surface of what could be outsourced. And I pose the question, I think an interesting way of looking at it is, if you were building a new organisation in Europe today, what would you put in each country? What would you actually need in each country in terms of headcount? And secondly, what do you need to own yourself and what could be outsourced? And if you ask that question, a clean sheet of paper, build an organisation from scratch, you would get a very different organisation from if you start with what you've got now and start trying to put a bit of transaction processing to Budapest or India. Totally different. If you look at what you need to put in each country, you start saying, well, we need some salespeople to actually press the flesh and meet the customer and build that chemistry and sell the products or services, whatever you're in business to do. Beyond that, do you need R&D? Do you need marketing? Do you need finance? Do you need HR? Do you need IT support? Do you need engineering? Do you need manufacturing? Not necessarily. That could be done somewhere in a centralised, low-cost location. Secondly, how much of the activities do you need to own? You know, if you look at many organisations like Virgin, for example, very few of their operations are run by Virgin themselves. They have a brand, they often own the customer contact, but a lot of the actual delivery and operations are run on an outsourced basis. So I think many organisations have a huge way to go to where they could be if they had started from scratch with a clean sheet of paper.
Finally, Peter, last year I recall there was a lot of talk around innovation. I've spoken to a few people here at the week today who said innovation, no, they don't want to talk about innovation, they want to talk about figures and they want to talk about actions and happening now. What's your view on innovation this year?
You must innovate or die, is my view. And I say that because if you're a shared services organisation, a captive, if you're not continuously improving, and the way you continuously improve and reduce cost is to innovate. You get huge labour arbitrage if you move offshore. You get that day one, you set up a shared service centre. What are you going to do day two? That's in the bank. The CFO, the CEO is going to say, well, give me a further cost reduction next year, the following year, the following year. You need to do things differently. You need to put in technology. You need to put process improvement in. You need to change the way you're doing your service level agreements and so forth. You need to innovate to continuously improve, and you need to move up the value chain. You start with transaction processing. You need to then see what else could be moved into the shared service centre or into the outsource agreement. If you don't innovate, if you don't continuously improve, if you don't reduce costs, you are not going to be efficient when compared to your competitors. Now, in a captive market, you may get away with it for a few years until there's a thorough benchmark and someone says, why the hell are we paying so much for the back office? We could give it to an outsourced provider for half the cost. If you're a BPO provider, you won't last a year if you're not efficient, if you're not innovating, if you're not continuously improving. Survival of the fittest suggests that if you're an outsourced provider, you will have clients knocking on your door, people like me who help clients pick outsourced providers, knocking on the door and asking tough questions. And if there isn't a Six Sigma lean continuous improvement methodology in place, for example, if there isn't some views on platform-based BPO, if the organisation isn't doing those things, they're not going to be moving up the value chain, they're not going to be adding more value to their clients, they're not going to be reducing their current costs, and people won't pick them. And if they don't pick them, they won't make money and they'll get taken over. So I think when it comes to innovation, it's very important. You innovate or you die, whether you're a captive or a BPO provider.
Do you foresee a major merger or acquisition in the year ahead?
I think there's a good chance that there will be one, maybe two significant acquisitions in the BPO space. Right now, if you look at the F&A, finance and accounting market, there are probably 10, 12 significant players who could handle a significant contract from the UK or even pan-European. Long term, I can't imagine there'll be more than 5 or 6 credible players, and then maybe some niche providers in various sectors and industries and so forth. So I think there will be some acquisitions. I would imagine that the organisations that don't have significant capability to innovate and to implement platform-based BPO, for example, I'd imagine that those players will find that they're becoming commodity players and they probably need to merge with someone or be taken over to carry on the expansion. So I think there will be some acquisitions, yes.
Thank you, Peter.
You're welcome.